Okay, I have a scene now that has a lot of objects in it, a bed scene, and these objects all have different textures associated with them. So in order to be able to see all of the different objects and their textures in my scene, I'm going to need to use the Hypershade. But before we open that up, let's just take a look at what this looks like if I try to render the scene. So I'm just going to go into my render view and click Render. And I've set this up so that there's a little bit more advanced rendering going on. I'm doing this through Mental Ray. There's some distinct shadows and coloration and all that. So it's at kind of a higher level result finish. But what I want to show you is that as I've opened up this scene, the all the textures that were in it originally have not come in, or the linkages are not correct anymore. And this is very often the case when you download files from the internet, where the person who set it up had a particular linkage to a texture on their computer, but of course that's not going to be the same linkage on your computer, and you have to go in and make sure to reset it. Um, so as you can see here, everything that's rendering black is not supposed to render black. It is meant to render in terms of the actual texture that's associated with it. And this is just not being found on my computer at the moment. So I'm just going to hit escape real quick to pause this render. And in fact, I'm actually just going to go in really quickly and change some of these settings so that it doesn't take so long to render. Let's put that at 0.25, and we'll put the let's see, I'll go into my advanced settings and turn off my final gathering. There we go, turn that off. Okay, so I'm just going to minimize that now. So how do we get to see this? Well, what we need to do is go into Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. Now I have my Hypershade open on this other window here, and this is what we get with our Hypershade. I'm just going to go ahead and clear that out. The Hypershade is a representation of all of the materials and textures in our scene. And what we see here are a variety of different little render spheres which tell us various texturing information that's associated with the objects in our scene. So for instance, if I were to shift right click, sorry, not shift right click, just right click on this render sphere here and say select objects with material, you can see here now which objects have that material assigned to it, the ones that are selected there. Same thing with this one here, select objects with material. It's, I think, just a little tassels. And this way you can kind of get an idea of what is associated with what objects and how to deal with that. But I do have a few of these that are black. And if I look at these objects that are black and I look at their properties over here, what I see is, compared to something like this material here, which has a definitive color, see my color channel here, which has that sort of ecru color, compared to this one, it's black, and it has this little icon here, which indicates that there's actually a file plugged into this color channel, which is the color coming from a image on your computer that is meant to be being read by Maya, but currently that linkage is broken. So what I could do is I could just click on that icon, and that will take me to the node associated with that file, and it's looking for my image at this particular location, right? So in the case of whatever you're working from, you don't need to worry about the original location. You just need to go in, make sure you see which file it is, in this case tkan2 underscore diff, stands for diffuse, .jpg, and just need to know where are those texture files that you downloaded. You just have to keep track of that. So in this case here, these are on my drive, and I've saved them out to a particular folder. So it's in this folder here, and it was tcan2 diff, which is this texture right here. So I'll say open. And now what's done is this render sphere is looking much better at the moment. Actually looks like something. And if I go into my scene here, it doesn't really show me anything different in the scene. But if I were to go into hitting the 6 key on the keyboard, um, if you hit the 6 key on the keyboard, what it does is it shows you all of the textures in the scene. And now, I don't know if you can tell, but the textures associated with the drapes at the bottom of the bed and the table here now have that texture applied to them. This material was associated with those objects, and so it has inherited that color now. If we look at this one here, it will be the same story, but I want to show you a different way to actually see quickly all the textures that are missing in your scene. Up here at the top is a list of various tabs that indicate different objects that are in your scene, including textures. So there's materials, which are just these spheres here, but the textures themselves are actually the files that are being linked to in your Maya scene. See, we've loaded in file 3, but we have file 1, 2, and 4 right now that are still missing. So it's really easy to see what's missing, what needs to be fixed by clicking on the Textures tab. So I'm going to click on File 1, and this is telling me I need to go find Tcan Diffuse. So we're just going to go into that same folder. There it is, Tcan Diffuse. It creates this floral pattern, which is associated with the bed and parts of the wardrobe. File 2 is wildsilk.jpg, which is this, and bring that in, and file 4 is tcan2 bump. Okay, and I'll just bring that in. So now if I were to go in and render this, we should get a result that actually looks a lot better and actually doesn't have these black patches left behind, because now Maya should be able to find all the different pieces that are missing from the shot otherwise. And you can see here that this is filling things in pretty nicely. Now it's missing some of the nice coloration that I had in the previous shot, just because I turned off a few features, which for the final render here, I'll show you at the end, I'll turn back on. This is a relatively large scene, and I have a light in the scene. You can see things can take a little while to render. This isn't too bad, about 38 seconds. And it's going to save this image here, but now you can definitely see that we have our floral patterns. Everything's back, no more strange black patches left behind. One thing that is worth pointing out, if you have a look at this pattern on the back of the wall here, you'll see that it's got this bit of noise to it. This feels like it's got a bit of texture to it. And that is produced through what's called a bump map. So if I were to find the material associated with this, which is, find the right thing here, clicking on everything except for the right one, there we go. If I go back to the materials here, that is this texture, or this material right here. I'm just calling it Fong 1 at the moment. It has a particular color associated with it, not a texture for that color, just this sort of peachy color, but it does have a file plugged into what's called the bump map. And what the bump map does is it uses black and white information to determine a raised versus lowered surface. Anything that is white feels like it's pushed out. Anything that's black feels like it's pushed in. And so if we look at what it's using here, wild silk, for instance, if I were to go to find that texture, it's this one here, right? Wild silk, just so you can better see it here. You'll see it's got this sort of fibrous pattern, and some of it's black, some of it's white. So what we would expect is as this gets applied to the object, anything that's white is going to start to push out a bit more. Anything that's black is going to sort of not be pushed out. And that's exactly what we see in our render. Now, if I were to turn that off real quick, for instance, if I were to go in, find my Fong, and right-click on this and say break connection, what that does is it gets rid of whatever's plugged in there, and go back and look at this here. And I'm just going to drag a selection around just this tiny area and say re-render just that region. Let it do its thing. There we go. Now you can see here that if I zoom in, that's what it would look like if I didn't have any bump on it, just be very flat. So the bump helps to give a little bit of extra visual interest. It's maybe a little bit strong, but it's better than just being completely flat. Now, of course, not everything is going to need a bump. Obviously, we don't have a bump map on all these other pieces, but it's nice to have it in certain locations. So what I'm going to do now is I'll just I could go back to my textures here, find this one that I had associated with this material, and just middle mouse click and drag that back onto the map, right? And in fact, actually, that's going to change a couple things that I had set up. I'm just going to hit the Z key to undo a few times, and go back to our materials here, undo until I get my map back. There we go. Cool. And I'm just going to go back in and put my nice render settings back on. So I had my final gathering on before, and I had my overall quality set to 1. So I'm just going to click render, and I'll pause the video, and I'll come back when that's... Okay, it's done now. It took just under 2 minutes to render that out. Obviously, the result here is much better than what we were seeing before, and of course, quality comes at the cost of time. But here we have a nice little scene, and this is just something that I downloaded, and I just had to reset up, making sure all the textures were working properly, but it's worth it, and I get a nice result. So I hope that's been of help, and I will see you in some future tutorials.